Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, offline and online. It's always safe to say that because you never really know who you offend, or as we said the last time, who will want to send your house address as the next palliative warehouse. So that Mr. Uluwadare is here means he's still insulated. Well, we just want to apologize that this meeting is a little delayed in taking off, but in about 6 minutes from now, we will take off formally. We just want to make this announcement so that you know all things are set. We're just waiting to take in one or two other persons before we begin. Thank you very much. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, online and offline. My name is Ayo Makinde, and welcome us to this event, which is about addressing COVID-19 without corruption, implementing safeguards against corruption in COVID-19 spending in Nigeria. Something that we all may be aware of is that in the wake of the pandemic, naturally, government would react. And government's reaction was to ensure that the needful was done, you know, to ensure that lives are not overly hampered in all of the things that we would do. And so, naturally, we began to see a lot of money pouring here and there from private sector practitioners. Emergency votes from government coffers were coming up here and there. We all know that the Attorney General's office came up with a framework to ensure proper accountability, proper disbursement and accountability for state funds. The Bureau of Public Procurement also came up with their own as well to ensure the needful was done. The ICPC also have their own safeguards to ensure that the needful was done. So if all of that was done, why the need for this session? The question is not far-fetched. To a large extent, over decades, the trust deficit between the people and the government has been greatly depleted. So if there is a bank of trust, that bank has already been, what's the word now? Liquidated. And it can no longer be recapitalized. But then maybe all hope is not lost. And that is what this whole meeting is about. SERAP coming up with this program to even check. Of course, you also know that SERAP also came up with a guide for some of these ministries, departments, and agencies to ensure that the needful was done. SERAP is not an MDA. SERAP is not a government functionary. SERAP can only offer counsel and push for the implementation of government's laws. And that is why we are here. How far reaching were those safeguards that God put up? How far with the implementation of those safeguards? That's what this meeting is set out to. Just so you know, those safeguards are just right there. And if there is any one of us who is with us online right now and offline, of course, it's a hybrid event, so you also can be a part of this conversation. Those of us who are already in the hall, we may not need to get online at all. In fact, I would advise that you do not try to get online. Otherwise, the most we do is just choke up the bandwidth, and consequently those who do not have the privilege you have of having this physical environment would not be able to have it. So, but for those of us online, if you are not the one speaking, kindly let your microphone remain on permanent mute. When you want to speak and you have been given the floor to speak, you will be asked to unmute your microphone. And please, if someone is talking, when someone is talking, you please do us. Could you please take down the volume of this microphone just a little bit? Thank you. Thank you. So if someone else is talking, kindly, make sure that your own mic is on mute so that we can enjoy the conversation. If peradventure you're cut off by reason of network from this conversation we're having, all you have to do is tap that link again. It'll return you back into this room and you'll be admitted immediately. In fact, from what I have seen us do, there is no waiting room. You just open the door and you come in. There'll be no usher you in. If you have comments and questions, you can just drop them right there in the chat room. They will be taken as and when due. There is an interactive session where we'll be alternating between those of us in the hall and those of us who are online. Now, if and when that time comes to talk and you have something to say, simply raise your hand, use the raise hand feature on any part of your screen where you have it, the lower part or the upper part or the side part. You'll be able to use that and kindly ensure that we use appropriate language. For other materials that will be shared, you please put your name and your email address in the chat feature. It'll be copied, and the virtual copies of the reports and everything that we have will be sent to you. Once again, I say thank you and welcome to this event. Well, the welcome address is supposed to be taken by Mr. Adetokunbo Momini, who is SERAP's director. But he is duly represented here by the Deputy Director of SERAP, Mr. Kolawole Oluwadare. If you're online and you want to clap, it's okay, although we may not be able to hear you. But if you're here, please welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Makinde. And thank you for not, or rather, not thank you for threatening to put my address online as a palliative warehouse. Because that data. Good morning, everyone in the room, ladies and gentlemen. I'm doing this on behalf of, for the records, on behalf of the director, Mr. Adetokunbo Momini. But in fact, I'm doing this on behalf of the board and management of the Socioeconomic Rights and Accountability Project. And so the welcome address, I'll start by thanking everyone for coming, those, the virtual constituency, and those who are in the room with us. We appreciate these acts that you've done this morning to be with us here today. So we welcome you most warmly. And today we are set. We have a wonderful array of panelists, brimming with erudition. And I'm sure you will see that when we are well underway. And we also have a very interesting topic to examine, which I'm sure is dear to all the hearts of Nigerians, given what we've seen on the pandemic and the after effects on the socioeconomic rights of Nigerians. And so we've seen SERAP launch what we call the 10-point agenda in June 2020, this year. That is at the peak of COVID-19. And we've seen various initiatives of government too. We're going to be rule of public procurement, the ICPC, and we have from the prominent one from the federal government from the Office of the Accountant General, which stipulates various mechanisms for spending of government and the various government actions in addressing the challenges brought up by COVID-19. So what we did then in June was to create a 10-point agenda that coalesced all these things into one to make it more easily understandable and to guide government actions. We launched that with various MDAs in attendance then in June. So now we're in November, and you would agree with me that with what we've seen and in the passage of time, it is not too late or too early. I would say it's just spot on to have a view of how these initiatives are fared vis-a-vis the various government actions on COVID-19. And there are many, and I'm sure most of us can bear witness to this, from the homegrown school feeding program, from the various cash palliatives and distributions of food items. Some people will say it was ordered, and some people will say it was looted. So we've all seen these things, and we've witnessed how it has happened. So we are here today to have a critical discussion, more focused discussion on these issues, and to assess in our own way as individuals, as Nigerians, whether these initiatives of government from the ICPC, from the BPP, and from the Accountant General of the Federation has really been put to use, and now that has benefited or otherwise us as Nigerians. So I'm very, very hopeful that we're going to have an interesting and robust discussion that will not be only talk for the sake of talk, but we would have good action points and follow-up points that we can do as Nigerian citizens to take this forward. So I'm welcoming everyone, our panelists, our keynote speaker, and everyone to this discussion. And I hope that at the end of this, we would really have taken one or two things to take on. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. If you plan to clap, please do it properly. Thank you very much. Well, incidentally, by the time, as we progress, we'll see why this announcement that I'm about to make is essential. Effort was made to contact those agencies of government that are directly concerned about this conversation. The ICPC, BPP, and in those agencies of government that had frameworks for COVID-19 spending, they were contacted to be here, and let's just hope that a miracle can happen, and then we'll be able to see them, whether offline here or online, as the going goes on. But then we go straight on into the conversation. We expect to have brief remarks from Makosa Foundation. They are on the program, but unfortunately, that is not possible at this time because we do not have confirmation nor representation that that would be possible. However, we believe that we have their goodwill for this event to go on. So straight away, we would like to invite for a keynote Professor Yemi Akinseye George, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, for his presentation. A round of applause for him, please, as he comes. Thank you.
So I think I can take this off. I'm standing at a fairly safe distance from you guys. Good morning, dear participants, both offline and online. Let me begin by congratulating SERAP on the issuance of this report, which we're about to discuss, titled 10-Point Program of Action on Promoting Transparency and Accountability in COVID-19 Spending in Nigeria. While congratulating SERAP, let me also quickly acknowledge my friend, my brother, Adetokunbo Mumuni, Director of SERAP, Director, Mr. Kolawole Oluwadare, who literally ordered me to come from Abuja to take this role. But for his insistence, there's no way I would have been able to come this morning. Thank you very much, Kolawole. Let me also thank some of the eggheads who contributed to this very important report. My friend, who is now an expert on human rights development and governance, Nigerian based in South Africa, Professor Oladejo Olowu. Perhaps you are joining this morning. I give kudos to you. You are acknowledged as one of those who made this report possible. I also want to appreciate Dr. Kolawole Olaniyan, legal advisor at the Amnesty International office in London. Let me also quickly acknowledge my co-panelists at this event. Let me start with my brother, Senior Silk, Yemi Candid Johnson, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, and my good friend, who is one of the champions of the campaign for accountability in Nigeria, courageous and committed the Director of HIDA, Mr. Olanrewaju Suraj. It is my pleasure to be on this panel with this eminent gentleman who I believe, together with whom we will do justice to the topic of this morning. Now, SERAP has become the foremost CSO in the area of socio-economic rights and accountability. There's no doubt about that. We give kudos to them for that. SERAP is also reputed for being a serial award winner. They have also become the leading voice of the voiceless in our country. We need more of such voices in this country. I salute the leadership and management, as well as staff of SERAP for their activism, consistency, and courage. And I say more grace to your elbows. Now, by way of an introduction to this report titled 10-Point Program of Action on Promoting Transparency and Accountability in COVID-19 Spending in Nigeria, opens with an introduction which highlights some of the key actions taken by the President Muhammadu Buhari administration to address endemic corruption in Nigeria. This include, according to the report, this include the famous presidential declaration that if we do not kill corruption, corruption will kill us. And I quote President Muhammadu Buhari. I also put a question mark there. GMB, General Muhammadu Buhari. Punch has insisted that they would describe the president as a general, for reasons not unconnected with some of the complaints regarding respect for human rights and the rule of law in the country. It is for you to decide whether the appropriate title for the president is either a general or a president. Then the report also refers to the Treasury single account, which was introduced by the former administration of President Goodluck Jonathan, but significantly expanded and implemented by this administration. Reference is also made to the establishment of the Presidential Advisory Committee Against Corruption, the whistleblower policy, increased prosecution of high-profile cases. These are some of the actions mentioned in this report as steps taken by the government to address endemic corruption. However, the report quickly points out that there is overwhelming evidence of persistence of corruption in the country, notwithstanding those steps outlined above. So SERAP quickly adds that despite the foregoing measures, corruption remains endemic in the country, citing several facts as evidence in support of this assertion. First and foremost, lack of adherence to the rule of law, weakening of the independence of the judiciary, You recall the infamous raid, nighttime raid on the residences of judges in this country I think about a few years ago. Weakening of the independence of the judiciary, pervasive systemic corruption at all levels of government. Pervasive, that is the word used by this program of action that we're trying to launch. Then the report also identifies a further evidence of persistence of corruption in what is called routine failure of ministries, departments, and agencies of government to submit their accounts for audit review by the Auditor General of the Federation, as required by the Constitution. This is the least that any department of government can do. Submit a report to the Auditor General of the Federation for verification, for further audit. This report identifies persistent failure and refusal by ministries, departments, and agencies to comply with this basic provision of the Constitution. Then what is the justification for this report? These factors provide justification for this report. So the huge public funds and private donations that have been committed to stop the spread of COVID-19 virus and address its consequences have prompted questions about the ability and commitment or sincerity of purpose of all tiers of government to ensure transparency and accountability in the use of the funds and the donations so far made. Of course, you'll agree with me that the recent invasion, or if you wish, raid of warehouses all over the country, where COVID-19 palliatives were reportedly stored by angry Nigerians. Although we do not justify violence, we do not justify, such abuses, but the fact that you could have such a colossal amount of palliatives stored when many Nigerians are suffering from hunger, chronic hunger, I think it does not point that government is actually committed to, using these funds and resources adequately, in the interest of the vulnerable and poor Nigerians. But, that is why there's justification for this kind of 10-point action program, which SERAP has put together to ensure that there's transparency and accountability going forward, not only with the use of COVID funds, but also with the use of every other fund that is described as government fund. Now, what actions has SERAP taken in the past? SERAP and others, and other organizations in the past. What actions have they taken to protect COVID-19 funds and donations? These actions are outlined in this report. In this report, in the introduction to this report, this include advocacy for transparency, open letter to the president was written by SERAP, ICPC team for preventing mismanagement of special intervention funds, development by the ICPC of a framework for monitoring the spending of COVID-19 funds. The issuance by SERAP of over 40 freedom of information requests, 40 freedom of information requests, more than 40, related to COVID-19 spending. And then filing court cases to compel compliance with the COVID-19 requests. I must seize this opportunity to especially also state that this report underscores the activities of the innovative actions taken by the ICPC, Independent Corrupt and Other Related Offences Commission, to protect the COVID-19 funds. All of these are described copiously in this report. Then the report points out examples of transparency frameworks in the context of COVID-19. It talks about the various frameworks that have been established, that have been put in place, to protect the funds. Framework on delivering a transparent food ration distribution for the National Homegrown School Feeding Program that is highlighted in this report. Framework for the management of COVID-19 funds in Nigeria under the Treasury single account by the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation. Some of these are also exhibited as annexures to this report. Guidelines for the conduct of procurement that respond to the COVID-19 challenge, and then accountability and transparency mechanisms for delivering cash transfers by the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs. All of these are cited as examples in this report of transparency frameworks that have been put in place, in the context of the COVID-19 situation. Now, further, this report states its own rationale. Why this kind of report? What is the justification? What is rationale? Why do we need this kind of report? This kind of report is required to encourage governments to implement transparency frameworks, to provide a sound framework for governments to ensure transparency and accountability in the use of public funds, and then to mobilize the citizens. And this is very critical. To mobilize the citizens. One of the factors which would ensure a successful anti-corruption fight or struggle for accountability and transparency is citizens' engagement. When everything is left to the whims and caprices of the powers that be, nothing happens. Promises are made, they are not kept. But when citizens are engaged, when citizens get into the arena and demand action in various forms, that's why I personally commend the youth of Nigeria who took to the streets to demand accountability, to demand justice, to demand fairness. However, this must not be an action that happens once in a long while. It should be a continuous action, and in such a way that hoodlums and other elements cannot take advantage. It is because we allowed a vacuum. That's why the hoodlums took over. Government drove legitimate people away from the street, and the wrong people took over. So this kind of demands by members of the public is necessary for us to have good governance, to have effective anti-corruption and transparency, in our country. So to mobilize citizens. So this kind of report can help to mobilize citizens so that we continue to demand, so that we continue to ask for change until there is change. And then to ensure the use of the government in this country is in the habit of defining. I mean, we have no problem defining programs or naming programs. We call them all kinds of names: Operation this, Operation that. Feed the nation, needs, National Economic Empowerment and Development Strategy, Economic Recovery and Growth Program. We are very good at labeling programs, but implementing them is the challenge. So this kind of report does not go into the luxury of academic discussions. It throws up powerful points which citizens, the media, and everybody interested in transparency can leverage on, to advance the struggle for transparency in the context of COVID-19 funds and beyond. Now, what is the first point in this program? Let us now look into the program itself. Point number one. This is point number one of the program, of the SERAP's 10-point action program. It says, condemn corruption and mismanagement, investigate and prosecute all allegations of corruption, maintain zero tolerance for corruption. That is point number one, zero tolerance. Somebody said, when you want to change society through the instrumentality of laws, you don't focus on the severity of the laws, but you focus on consistency. You make sure there's consistency. When people are aware that their actions will be probed, that their actions will be investigated, when there's certainty that there will be demand for accountability, people will watch the things that they do. So that's point number one of the 10-point action program: condemn and corrupt all allegations of corruption. Of course, SERAP alone cannot do that. So we need the support of every other civil society organization in this respect. We need the efforts of journalists, the media practitioners, those who can use the internet very well, to constantly monitor. Vigilance is required in this respect. Eternal vigilance. Then point number two of the SERAP 10-point program: ensure access to information consistent with the Freedom of Information Act, open governance partnership commitments, etc., to foster citizens' collaboration. We've spoken about this earlier on, and I'm sure there'll be much more discussion on the importance of citizens' collaboration. But there can be no effective collaboration by citizens in the absence of free flow of information. Let there be information. Let there be information. And that is why I'm very hopeful that Nigeria will not remain like this forever. Because more than ever before, there's information online in all kinds of places, and people are informed. So we should ensure that nothing stops access to information. And that's why we should seize the opportunity to condemn every attempt to restrict the use of the internet. Of course, we also should condemn abuses of the use of the internet by irresponsible fellows who post things that are not right. If we need to take care of the internet, those are the constituencies that we need to take care of. But it's not by saying the internet cannot be used by even those who are using it for good and progressive causes. We need to understand the issues there. Then point number 3, this SERAP's 10-point program makes a very powerful point. It says we should adopt and implement fiscal and budgetary policies to improve socio-economic rights of Nigerians. Socio-economic rights of Nigerians. You know, right to quality education, adequate health care, clean water, and regular electricity supply. You know, that is point number 3 of the SERAP 10-point action program. Then point number 4 of the 10-point program, obey the rule of law. Obey the rule of law, including judiciary independence, financial autonomy, implementation of the various decisions of courts on accountability of senior government officials. I have always taken this view, and I believe, and I'm glad that this report, this program, a 10-point program confirms it, that we need a vibrant, very courageous, and fearless judiciary for Nigeria's democracy to be sustained. And a judiciary that can call a spade a spade. You know, because the political branches have not demonstrated adequate responsibility with their functions. You find a National Assembly that keeps on allocating to itself humongous salaries when the majority of Nigerians are poor, can hardly survive, living below $100 or $1 a day. $1 a day. We find a National Assembly that continues to award to itself humongous salaries. And I have said it that this democracy is not sustainable the way it's going because of the huge expenses spent on political activities of the National Assembly and other political office holders. So we need a judiciary that is well-funded, well-resourced, independent, well-educated, that can call a spade a spade. A judiciary that will not be at the beck and call of the political elite. Judges who are well-paid, well-protected, well-educated. So this report emphasizes the need to obey the rule of law. That's point number 4 of the SERAP 10-point action program. Independence of the judiciary, financial autonomy of the judiciary, and then implementation of the various decisions of court, respect for decisions of courts. When a government does not respect the decisions of its own courts, that is a clarion call to anarchy. We must not allow anarchy in this country. Government must develop a habit of respecting decisions of courts. That is point number 4 of SERAP's 10-point action program. And then this report that we are launching cites specific examples of decisions of courts which government has refused to comply with. And there are a couple of them here. There's a judgment of Justice Muhammad Idris ordering this administration to publish spending details of stolen funds recovered by the government since 1999. That should not be rocket science. If we have proper record, we should have in the public space, how much have we recovered? Looted funds recovered since 1999. We don't have to, shout too loudly for these reports to be made public. Then secondly, judgment of Honorable Justice Oluremi Oguntoyinbo ordering this government to recover pensions collected by former governors, now serving as ministers and members of the National Assembly, and directing the federal government of Nigeria to challenge the legality of states' pension laws, permitting ex-governors and others to continue to collect humongous pensions years after they have left office. And I'm happy that some states are already responding. Lagos State, for instance, I believe, has taken steps to abolish such laws. Kwara State has also done so. Zamfara State has done so. I believe several other states must take steps to abolish any law that confers such rights to humongous pensions on these retired office holders, former governors. Then there's also the judgment of Justice Muhammad Idris, ordering prosecution of senior lawmakers suspected of padding and stealing 481 billion naira from the 2016 budget, and the publication of the report of investigations into the alleged padding of the 2016 budget. These reports are there. National Assembly, they are in the habit of having a lot of investigative reports. But when they have investigative reports, they spend a lot of money on this report, run into billions. Nothing comes of these reports. All the public hearings that they have been holding, what have we heard about them? Have they made laws specifically to address those findings of those public hearings. They have not. So SERAP is demanding that there must be compliance, not only by the government, but also by the legislature with the decisions of courts regarding accountability and transparency. Then point number 5 of SERAP's 10-point program: ensure openness of public procurement. Ensure openness of public procurement. You know, public procurement still goes on in secrecy in our country. Although this Federal Executive Council meets from time to time, you know, to approve billions of naira for different projects. But that's not what the law says. The law says there should be a National Council of Public Procurement, which the government has not constituted. When you leave decisions of procurement strictly in the hands of politicians, that's what you get. You get unexecuted projects. You get abandoned projects. You get inflated projects. That is the risk that we face. If this democracy is going to be sustainable, we must change our attitude to public procurement. That's precisely what SERAP is saying in point number 5 of this report. It says we must ensure openness of public procurement. All the charade that goes on, you see all kinds of advertisements and so on. You and I know that before you can get any contract, you need either to be a partner with somebody in the government. You know, this is all charades. We talk about public procurement. Do we really have public procurement in our country? So I'm delighted that this report focuses on the challenge of public procurement. Then point number 6 of SERAP's 10-point action program, it says reduce salaries and allowances of public officials. We cannot overemphasize this. Our senators and legislators are the highest paid in the world. If I don't want to mention figures that are bandied around as salaries of our legislators. This is most unfortunate. And the salaries of these people, the amount of allowances that they get is frustrating. It's killing this democracy. Now we keep on borrowing money. Where does the borrow funds? To what are these funds applied? We borrow funds to pay salary. We borrow funds to maintain the opulent and expensive lifestyles of political office holders. You can see some of our politicians when they're driving on the street, 10 cars, 10 SUVs. With all kinds of sirens. You know, so SERAP is saying we need to reduce this, and I agree with SERAP on this point, and on all the other points, we need to reduce salaries and allowances of public officials. Several other countries have done it. We cannot continue to pay these humongous salaries and expect that this economy will survive and that this democracy will survive. It will not survive. It will not. Then point number 7 of the SERAP's 10-point program. You know, encourage citizens' complaints on corruption and follow up on complaints. Encourage citizen complaints, including actively encouraging CSOs and ordinary citizens to utilize whistleblowing and hotline channels to expose corrupt practices related to COVID-19 and beyond. Then offering CSOs adequate legal protections and the cessation of harassment by security agents. CSOs are not enemies of the people. They are not enemies of the government. They are crusaders for the public good, for the public interest. Please, let us encourage CSOs and citizens to complain and raise and draw attention to issues of corruption. That's point number 7 of SERAP's point. Now we go to point number 8. We'll be done in a few minutes. Point number 8 of SERAP's 10-point action program. It says, respect, protect, and promote human rights of everyone. We are back to human rights. Whether we like it or not, human rights must remain the mainstay of our democracy. Without human rights, you can't talk about democracy. You know, so this point number 8, very critical. Respect, protect, and promote human rights of everyone, not only of the rich and of the wealthy, but of the vulnerable and of the poor. Then point number 9 of the SERAP's 10-point program, ensure civil society participation. Create opportunities for all citizens, including CSOs and those from marginalized communities, journalists, etc., to make inputs into COVID-19 related decision-making about resource allocation. And then point number 10, which is the final point, we're rounding up now. Point number 10 says, engage bilateral, regional, and international partners, because we are not an island unto ourselves. We need to engage independent analysts, international analysts, and let them let them see what you are doing and provide advisory support, And finally, in conclusion, we go to the conclusion now. The SERAP's 10-point action program is well researched, lucid, pragmatic, and down to earth. This presentation merely gives you a taste of the pudding. It is only by reading and using the report that you can really understand and have the full benefit of it. Don't behave like those people who are said, who are in the habit of keeping documents, but without reading them. Please don't let's do that. I therefore commend the SERAP 10-point action program on accountability and transparency in COVID-19 spending and beyond to the federal government of Nigeria, the 36 state governments, and all committees handling COVID-19, the donations, and every other. Having wanted, thank you very much for your attention, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
With that kind of elucidation, if you are not happy with it, go to court. Well, we have to thank you very much, Professor Yemi Akinseye George, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, for that brilliant one that you have done. Could we please give him another round of applause? Thank you. Now, this is a proposition of SERAP. This was the proposition of SERAP. And it didn't come from nothing. It came from the fact that as soon as this whole COVID-19 thing started, so many organizations, so many individuals were interested, and they were pouring in their own widow's mite, so to speak, to ensure that things were done properly. But how effectively, between June and now, would you say that this 10-point report, this 10-point plan, this 10-point proposition of SERAP has fared in the scheme of things as far as our fight against COVID-19 and corruption is concerned in this country? That's the issue we'll be taking on in the panel discussion coming up shortly. But very quickly, let me recognize a few individuals who have since joined us in this conversation. Have with us Mr. Itoro Duku of the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Disaster Management has joined us virtually. Thank you very much for joining us in this conversation. We've also had with us all the while Godwin Odusanya of Amnesty International, as well as Bede Akora. We also have with us from NFIU, Dr. Emmanuel Shotonde. Thank you very much for being a part of this conversation. Mojisola Oguduno is also of Amnesty International, as well as Efeyiwa Patricia Nwosu, who is Senior Investigative Officer, Human Rights Commission, Edo, and a number of other people who have joined us online. Thank you very much. And of course, there are so many of us that are here. So let's get into the conversation that bound to take this further. We want to have a panel discussion on government transparency framework in response to COVID-19 challenges and future perspectives. The last time we had a global emergency of this magnitude was 100 years ago. 100 years ago, they didn't have the kind of technology that we have now, and they didn't have so many other things. Already, there are prospects of getting a vaccine that will help us to be insulated against the vagaries of COVID-19. But then there are some things that we cannot be vaccinated against unless we do something really serious about it. Otherwise, there would have been a vaccination against corruption. But I don't know if that's in the offing anywhere in the world, but Nigeria is our own. So I want to have a panel discussion on government transparency framework in response to COVID-19 challenges and future perspectives. We've talked about the framework put up by the Bureau for Public Procurement, by ICPC, by the Attorney General of the Federation's Office, and so on like that. You also, joining us in the virtual space, can be a part of this conversation. When the panel discussion begins, all you need to do is drop a message or just raise your hand with that raise hand feature, and they will be able to take your comments. But let me very quickly bring on our panelists for this morning. Of course, we have met one. He's the one that just gave us some insight into the conversation. Professor Yemi Akishaye George, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. A round of applause for him, please, as he comes forward. Thank you. We have as well another Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Yemi Kandide Johnson. A round of applause for him, please, as he comes. Thank you. Yeah. Now that I'm sitting next to two Senior Advocates of Nigeria, have been pronounced a Senior Advocate of Nigeria. All in favor say aye. The ayes don't have it though. It's not by pronouncement. All right, we also have the chairman of HEDA Resource Center, Mr. Larry Suraj, also be a part of the conversation. Please welcome him as he comes forward. I don't know if one of the okay, well, the last person is not here yet. Toyosi Akeli Ogunshiji, as soon as she comes, we'll also introduce her. So don't forget, those of us online, we can be a part of this conversation by simply tapping the raise hand feature or we'll drop a message. But let us begin. It's pretty straightforward, some people might assume. It is not supposed to be a brainer, it's supposed to be a no-brainer. But let me begin with Mr. Kandide Johnson, SAN. Now, all of these have been there. The federal government agencies have put up one thing or the other. The Office of the Attorney General, the BPP, ICPC, and a number of other institutions. Of course, COVID-19, the PTF COVID-19 has said repeatedly, they do not collect cash. But of course, maybe they have their own financial resource to do all the travels, prosecute the activities of NCDC and all of that. In the first place, on the one hand, are those policies? But then what we are interrogating is the implementation. Were they designed ab initio to be implemented from where you sit? Let me see if this is working.
Hello. Thanks very much. Well, thanks very much for the invitation, to the opportunity to contribute to this important topic. Thank you. So brilliantly. Thank you, Professor Akishaye George, for so brilliantly introducing the topic. And thank you to SERAP, a leader in accountability and rights across Nigeria. It's a very important topic. Now, the question you ask is, I was watching a program 2 days ago, Femi Falana on TV, and he was talking about human rights in Nigeria. And he said, Nigeria has the most sophisticated and the most detailed human rights regulation regime in the world. Then he paused. On paper is exactly how he put it. So it seems to me that we have a habit of circumlocution in our governing. And this is the background for all these reports which you referred to, and this sort of the question of the reports BPP, Office of the Accountant General. They produce these reports because they have practiced the art of dissimulation and dissemblement. They understand that if you give people things to think about, put things in their hands, make them running up and down like children, they won't know what you're doing. Now, a crisis like the one we're facing now with COVID, as with everybody in the world, tests the robustness of your governance systems. Of course, SERAP has been challenging this for many years. You ought to giving rules and ideas. But when you have a crisis, which is existential, then you have it, you put it through a magnifying glass and you can see more clearly. This is why a crisis is an opportunity, even though it portends a disaster. So what is the test of the effectiveness of these rules? It's enforcement. It's, I find myself saying too often that in Nigeria, well, I'll take this off so that I'm not done confused. I don't want to infect anybody or don't want anybody to infect me. But when you, Nigeria, it's difficult to avoid the conclusion that the purpose of governing is to extract corrupt benefit for a privileged few, and that the game is to be sure that that game can continue while people are running helter-skelter. So you find, for example, people are always speaking about the Constitution. And the Constitution of Nigeria is one of the longest in the world, 400 sections or so. Topics which shouldn't even be in a Constitution are in the Constitution. Areas where the legislature should have wiggle room to decide from time to time is excluded. The purpose, in my view, of these deepening volume of reports that will be produced and then put, the government of Nigeria doesn't know the reports it has produced, for example, on constitutional restructure and organization of the country. So if you ask the Attorney General of the Federation, what is the policy of the government and so and so? They say, well, we don't know. I was on a TV program the other day and the presidential spokesman said in response to the proposal that Nigeria be restructured as made by certain Southwest governors, let them go to the National Assembly. There are many things that have been done. Now, it seemed to me to be such a silly response if you looked at it in the context of reasonable and responsible government. But they're not surprising in the culture which we find ourselves, because that dismissal of any thought or any progression from the organization of rational thoughts and ideas in reports to action in policy is something that is not, it is inconsistent with the governing plan. So there's no intention. This is my own impression. And I just think that the beauty of what SERAP has done is this simplicity. Because I find many people talk about the whole labyrinth of lawmaking we have in Nigeria, the whole labyrinth of reports that we make in Nigeria. It's very easy to hide behind words and to hide behind documents and to hide behind Section 374 of the Constitution. Anytime somebody tells me, as in Section 374, I say, what does it say? You know, I don't care about the subsection. I want to know, is it the right to life? Is it the right to education? What is it that you're talking about? We tend to hide behind those things, and I think this is what the government does as well.
Well, a round of applause, please. For the first submission here, as far as Mr. Candidate Johnson SAN is concerned, the reports were, to quote the exact words of Mr. Falana, on paper. But let me ask you, Mr. Larry Siraj, given that ICPC has its job cut out for it, independent, corrupt practices, and other related offenses commission, Bureau for Public Procurement has its job cut out. The Attorney General of the Federation has his job cut out. Were those frameworks by those MDAs necessary ab initio? Or was it just an intent?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And Sarah, in doing this very fantastic job. And I think this is where the engagement between government and civil society really should lead to. We should provide alternative to even the frameworks that you're talking about, the policies that you're talking about. It is not just about criticism, it is also about telling the government that there are also superior knowledge outside there that you can take advantage of. Some of them are even for free. Government consultants will possibly have charged billions. You know how much was paid to consultants to come up with the Nigerian here, the aviation ministry work to get the national carrier that never even took off till now, but the consultancy has been paid. So there's abundance of resources in the civil society. And one of the other very critical points is that we should take advantage of this opportunity to tell it to Nigeria, to know where we're coming from. If we're just talking about this 10-point agenda, people might not appreciate it sufficiently enough if you don't show how SERAP came about this. And if you look at it critically, the first problem that was experienced, and that was, I think, also led to some of this framework that you mentioned, which would tell you, for me, they are completely unnecessary if we have been living by the rules before now. Just like the senior advocate said earlier, all we just want to do is to mention some very fabulous ways of describing policies and formulations. And you can see that with the NSAS. As confused as the government is in responding to the issue of brutality, police brutality, there are more than sufficient laws, policies, and regulations, recommendations funded by government, either through the National Human Rights Commission, the Police Service Commission, the police itself, and the several presidential panel to reform the police. At the critical point when the call for reform of the police became an international issue, the government, like Lane said, cannot even point at some of those relevant recommendations are made by government. And I'm sure even calling someone like Professor Akishaya George would have assisted as being a special advisor to former attorney generals that has been involved in quite a number of recommendations and committees, but it's just a government, and the best you can get of many of the Nigerian government, the best anytime you want to see them performing. Two areas. One, setting up committees. The second one, shunning out policies without the intention to follow through on the implementation of those committees. So when you want to see the background that I've mentioned, and you now make it, let's now take it down to COVID-19 experience. We've had the homegrown school feeding program existing before COVID. And suddenly you heard a minister saying, during COVID, we're still going to give food to children. And then you want to wonder which children. Schools are closed. Children were not in school. So who are the ghost children that you're going to give the food? And at that point, you will know clearly that there's an agenda somewhere. and the typical of government, both politicians and the civil servants, it has created an opportunity to continue the perpetuation of meaning you would see launching and then you will only just see the ceremonial event and then you will not see the beneficiaries. When it also comes to the issue of testing, the testing of for COVID, you will see states claiming to spend 10,000 and 50,000 for testing at the average.
You can use this one.
For testing an average person for COVID, and then you would see another state spending 6,500, 7,000, using the same testing kits within the same country in Nigeria, and then you would be able to tell immediately that this is not just about testing. And one of the most unfortunate, and that is why even 40 years, 50 years, we're still likely to be talking about fight against corruption. It's basically because many of Nigerians' average politicians and civil servants actually profit from the mystery of the average Nigerian. So it is not about assisting or ameliorating the situation. And so where the whole world is also looking at making safe and easy for an average traveler during the pandemic and under the COVID, you would see Nigeria coming up with policies in a process that is completely opaque. They have selected particular test centers, private test centers, and an average traveler is required not only to go and test before they travel. After certification of being free of COVID, you're still expected to get tested when you get here. That is not the problem. The problem is you're expected to pay a whopping 50,000 naira and above. So you are not seen as a traveler, you are seen as a cash cow. And if you also want to travel out of the country, you're not allowed to bring the normal test from the free testing center. If you're bringing from the free testing center, and many of you should go and check, before the airport was opened, for you to get your result for tests for COVID is within 24, 48, and 72 hours. The moment the airport was opened, that was increased to 7 days. This was also to make very difficult for people to actually use the free testing center for traveling purposes. So you have to go to private testing labs, so-called certified testing lab, before you can use it. So these are already situations that not just frameworks can make work, because we tested some of those framework, and my organization and SERAP are taking some of the government institutions and agencies to court over that, to ask questions. The Open Treasury is called the Open Treasury Portal, but it is less open than an open book, because you would see what has been done is just to identify projects. You don't know the beneficiary, you don't know the total cost, you don't know the process of awarding those contracts. These are very critical issues that are more than just framework within the country. Thank you.
Well, this is definitely something of interest. As we have said earlier, you can be a part of this conversation. Just drop a message in the group. And if you would like to speak, again, don't forget we are getting close to that point right now where we will take that up as well. Well, our fourth panelist has since joined us. She's Toyosi Akerele Ogunshiji of Victims Support Fund. Thanks for joining us this morning. Well, with the examples that we have heard of these institutions of governments that have also been a part of all of these supports to people, humanitarian affairs ministry, public procurement apparatus and parastatals of governments doing whatever it is that they need to do. How effective would you say that those efforts were on the part of government to ensure that the needful is done and many people are not shortchanged?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Toyosi Akerele Ogunshiji, and even though a lot of people know me to work for Rise Networks, I'm currently the chairperson for the Victims Support Fund COVID-19 Task Force. And I've been chairing that since March this year. Victims Support Fund is a private sector-led humanitarian organization that works specifically across the northeast of Nigeria, focusing on victims of insurgency and terrorism. However, our interventions so far have reached about 12 states. And by the end of December this year, we'd have gone to about 30 states. So I'm actually leaving here tomorrow to head off to kick off the North Central and the Northwest interventions, because those are the only two geopolitical zones we haven't touched. So I apologize, I came in slightly late. I'm really sorry. As you can see, my voice is slightly broken, so I have a bit of a fever, but I mean, I just had to be here. So I'm sorry about that. I apologize. Thank you for the question. This is a very important subject matter because personally for me, and I think it should be for the entire country, especially because of the level of deep-seated inequalities in Nigeria and the level of poverty, especially amongst the ordinary people of this country. I think that more than the fact that we want to be able to ensure that we plug all the loopholes that do not allow for people to profit from the misfortunes of other ordinary citizens. We also want to be able to ensure that the COVID-19 pandemic presents us as a country the opportunity to recalibrate and to rebuild, our systems from the ground all the way up. Victims Support Fund is not the government, so I may not be able to speak from the side of the government, but I can share a few lessons about some of the things, we've learned in the course of...
I asked that because in the course of your intervention,
yes,
one would have expected, or one would expect, that given the paraphernalia of government, the intricate systems of governments,
that's right,
and the expectedly pervasive influence and reach of government, what private sector-led initiatives like yours would do should be minimal. So that's why I'm asking, from what you have seen, how deep or how involved, how widespread would you say government intervention has been in the light of COVID-19?
I think that your analysis is spot on, but I also believe that things work like that in countries where you have people that understand the very, the enormity of the responsibility that comes with leadership. That is how you can say, and that's a very pregnant statement. When you put people in positions of authority to provide for the needs of other people, I think it comes with a high level responsibility that I'm not sure that a lot of people in government in Nigeria seem to understand. However, I must emphasize the fact that one of the things that COVID-19 personally showed me and my colleagues on the task force is the lack of preparedness on the side of government for emergencies and epidemics, and crisis situations like COVID-19, which we did not prepare for as a country. The fact that the lack of infrastructure, I mean, people die in Nigeria for having basic headache. So you imagine the amount of, risk that people were prone to just because of lack of basic infrastructure in healthcare centers, where there were healthcare workers had no simple things like face masks, latex gloves, hand sanitizers and all that. Now, the other thing I must remind you about is one of the things that would destroy Nigeria fast if we don't fix it is the seeming bureaucratic bottlenecks around government, which really should not exist, but are artificially created by certain people with vested interests who make it extremely difficult to do very simple things within very short period of time with very few people. You need to sign this and sign that and go through that. Those were some of the things we tried to eliminate in the VSF. So let me explain. Rather than, we had a preliminary 1 billion, which was, given to the Victim Support Fund by General T.Y. Danjuma, the chairman.
$1 billion?
1 billion naira.
Oh, okay.
And that 1 billion was, meant to begin to cover 7 different states. So we looked at, we were following the NCDC numbers, and we used a lot of data-driven methodologies in approaching our interventions, such that the first thing we did was to focus on creating a needs assessment, so that you don't go into communities where people don't have any need and simply go and spend money there because you need to spend money so that certain people can benefit from that process. So Borno State, for example, got 20% of that 1 billion. Lagos, as the frontline COVID-19 state, got 20%, right? Abuja got 15%, Ogun, Yobe, Adamawa, Taraba got 10%, and then you had Abuja get 15% as the FCT. Again, we were mindful of the fact that we were in the middle of a lockdown, and it would be difficult for the government to implement a lockdown if people were hungry and had to go out and seek for their survival. So we invested in not just food. We bought a lot of medicine. Even for medicine, we broke it down to primary care and secondary care. And we also were mindful of the fact that a lot of people from our age 50 and above were more prone to coronavirus. So we invested in, anti-diabetes and anti-hypertension, medication. We bought hand sanitizers. We were very, very particular about hand washing. So we bought tablet soap, we bought disinfectants for public offices and all that. But you see, I talked about the inequities at the beginning. And that informs the decision of the Victim Support Fund's third phase intervention, which is also 1 billion. Now, the reason why we are now going, as we prepare for the gradual reopening of schools, we've actually started from Plateau, Nasarawa, and Abuja. We're actually setting up 54 different schools across 18 states of Nigeria, cut across all the 6 geopolitical zones. We're donating, solar-powered boreholes to them to a capacity of about 2,000 liters, in addition to automated hand washing, foot pedal hand washing stations, because you need to protect children and teachers. Why is that important? When you see government make policies, at the very beginning of COVID-19, all of the information was in English language. And you forget IDPs in Malkoyi IDP camp in Adamawa who don't read English, who don't hear any other language apart from Fulfulde, Fulani and Kanuri and Hausa language. The risk communication was so poor, both on the side of the government and on the private sector. The VSF was the first organization that started to translate coronavirus information into Yoruba, Igbo, Hausa, Pidgin English, and distributing. And then we didn't just use flyers, because we noticed that a lot of low-income earners at the bottom of the pyramid, even though spoke their native languages, could not read their native languages. So a lot of people speak Yoruba in Lagos, but they can't read Yoruba. So we invested in radio communication, because all those Fulani, farmers, cattle rearers, basically listen to a lot of their transistor radio. You would then ask me why the North was important. Because the North was the primary constituency of the VSF, as I mentioned. However, our chairman, General Danjuma, had said we had to go all the way to ensure that even though insurgency and terrorism was predominantly in the Northeast, coronavirus was all over the country. So we could not focus our resources only on those. And it was shocking to me to go into IDP camps where people hadn't had their bath for days. Now you were doing sensitization and saying that people should wash their hands under running water for 30 seconds. And there are communities in this country where they've not seen water for 2 months. So only about 24.2% of Nigerians have access to running water. So that sort of infrastructure is what government should have invested in. So, like I said, it uncovered the ugly underbelly of Nigeria's lack of preparedness in terms of infrastructure, in terms of government's responsiveness to epidemics and pandemics like this one, and in terms of the fact that simple things in government that require 2 people don't require multiple file carrying across different departments just because that is what feathers some people's nests.
Oh dear. Well, thank you very much for that one. Prof, we can sit here and analyze and promulgate and theorize and plan and propose. But then there was something Mr. Candidate Johnson mentioned, which I think is necessary. It's also a fallout of some of the things that Ms. Akerele Ogunshiji has said, and which also Mr. Suraj, referenced. Systems.
Institution.
Yes. No, institution is a big word, though. Let's start with a small one. Systems. He mentioned, succinctly that when I asked, I said, were the policies designed to be executed? And he said, look, in the first place, the systems to execute those propositions were not even there in the first place. Perhaps one can say that's where the problem begins from. Or would I be wrong, sir?
Where do I start from? Because I followed the contributions of my co-panelists, beginning with the senior advocate. I think we should thank SERAP for putting this platform together. Because this 10-point action program that we have come to launch seems to tie everything together. Mr. Candide Johnson, SAN, Mr. Olanraju Suraj spoke about the love of government people for report writing, setting up committees, and so on and so forth. And then Toyosi Akerele, who came in even after they had made their contributions, spoke about lack of preparedness. For the emergency, there was no evidence of preparedness. In fact, that documents which were to be used all over the country were written in English language. So you ask people to wash their hands for 20 seconds under water, running water. There's no water anywhere in the country. Say only 42% of Nigerians have access to running water. So I think that we should seize the opportunity of the COVID-19 challenge to restart this country. We are not doing well as a country. That's what it shows. We do not have a clear-cut plan for the majority of the people of this country. One of the earlier speakers stated that we love circumlocution. We keep moving in circles. We still cannot count ourselves. We cannot count our money. We cannot even count our votes as a people. So I think the opportunity, but Mr. Candide Johnson stated that the COVID-19 challenge should be an opportunity to kickstart this country, to start afresh, to start with the basics, particularly because now, where are the elite, members of the elite class, where are they going to run to? And I'm also, we belong to that class. Where are we going to run to? You can't go to the Europe, you can't go to America, you can't go to India, which is the traditional place for medical tourism. So this is an opportunity to look inwards. We have gathered so much money members of the elite have gathered so much for themselves. The recent demonstration by the masses of this country on the streets is evidence that the people are not happy with the elite class, beginning with the political elite, the professional elites, you know, and all kinds of elites. So we need to use the opportunity of the COVID-19 challenge to go back to the basics. And the SERAP report that we have come to learn today provides a starting point. It talks about rule of law, for example. What is the role of judiciary in all of this? We underfund the judiciary. You know, we underfund that we underpay judges. Judges have been on the same salary for 13 years. So you expect judges to watch the mood of government before taking decision. To see if government is not happy with us. You know, so I think we should use the opportunity of the COVID-19 pandemic to start this country afresh. If you don't like the expression restructuring, you can leave that expression. But we need to reorganize ourselves. We've got the resources. We've got so many of our youths on the street, jobless, and yet we are insecure. Some hoodlums hide in the jungles to harass people as they travel, as people go about their businesses. And we have youths walking on the streets without jobs because we are not organized. Because the elites are thinking only of themselves, their children, and their nuclear family. What about this large population of people? So we need to use the opportunity of the COVID-19 pandemic, beginning with this SERAP report, talks about rule of law. Yes, yes.
Is about the systems that Mr. Khalid Johnson mentioned, which is, do we have the systems? The 10-point plan, by the way, was something that SERAP released in June, hoping that when the different MDAs come up, they will be able to use that as a guide to implement the policies that we are talking about. That, you know, so that's what I was asking, and I'd like you to please go there. The systems that run Nigeria across the 36 state governments. She mentioned the issue, was it Mr. Suraj that mentioned civil servants the other time? You know, is the system strong enough, structured enough, or styled, positioned in a way as to execute those
of government, if you like, systems, is to, as we have them now, is to extract corrupt benefit for a privileged few. That's all these current systems, the so-called transparency framework, budget procurement. We know that the government people who make these programs, they know that these programs don't work. You have just been told by the Victims Fund, Victim Support Fund executive, that even COVID-19 instructions that were to be distributed all over the country were written in English language. And I'm sure they were printed with millions of money. And then you take these things written in English language to places where people cannot read English. He said it was when they got to some of these places that they started saying, let's start to translate to local languages. What needs assessment were conducted before we jumped into the street, buying things, acquiring things. You know, so the systems are not, we don't have systems that are meant to take care of the majority of the people. But the systems we have are created to take care of the privileged few. And that is the challenge. We need a system that can take care of the greater majority of Nigerians. I just told you about youths. The youth population of this country is more than, I think it's about 70%, 80%. You know, and we are not providing for that. We are sitting on a keg of gunpowder. We need to begin to use everything that we have, bearing in mind that the majority of the country are youths. Thank you.
And the earlier we recognize that, the better. For the purpose of clarity, in the 82% that Mr. Khalid Johnson is talking about is within ages 0 and 45. And you take out that, you've taken out a significant essence of Nigeria. Well, you wanted to say something the other time about the systems.
Well, I just wanted to say that I think that I always like subjects around transparency and accountability. But I think that we always forget the most crucial component in these conversations, which is that we're successfully as a country raising an army of educated illiterates who will by no chance have the requisite capacity to demand any level of accountability from the people in government. I personally am convinced that it is a deliberate ploy on the part of the Nigerian political elite to ensure that the successor generation of Nigeria does not get the sort of education they need to be able to make the right choices. Why do I say that? When you look at the level of conversations happening on social media, and you look at the level of conversations happening on the ground, you feel like there are two different sets of young people from two different countries entirely. We on social media have education, we're exposed. I always say there are two categories. He talked about young people, but there are two categories of young people in Nigeria. The first category, the educated, the privileged, and the exposed, who can have this sort of sane and meaningful conversations and hold you right on your money, right? Then you have the second category of young people, the ones you describe as hoodlums, who are actually victims of circumstances because they have no education, they have no jobs, they are deprived and angry with the system. And those ones form the majority of the young people who will overrun this country if something drastic does not happen. They don't care about your memos and your policy memos and your reports and all that. Nigeria, I mean, look, you can sit here and talk about systems, but Nigeria doesn't have any systems, as it were. A system where people steal money and get chieftaincy titles and are rewarded with doctorate degrees. A system and a country without consequences of any form, where we don't put punitive measures behind bad behavior. Right? A system where people wake up and simply run amok in our public service. A system that is designed to frustrate people with good intentions from coming into the political space to make any difference. So you have a perpetration of criminals consistently recycling themselves within the political system, and politics matters. When you tell me that I'm going to stay in private sector and do my thing, what you forget is that your son is going to be harassed by a SAS officer who can shoot him in Lekki or in Banana Island where your elite body stays, right? What you forget is that the small businesses that actually power Nigeria's economy are being killed by taxes every day, by tax regimes that are put in place by the government. What you forget is that the potholes that you run into in your Bentley at night are roads that are meant to be fixed by the government. Listen, we cannot, as a country, outsource our critical thinking to God, to pastors, and to imams. The generation that built an entire technology sector Nigeria's technology sector had grown to a point before government started to intervene. Paystack, a company that was only 5 years old, was bought over for millions of dollars last week with very minimal government intervention. Do we need government? Absolutely yes. Can we do without government and begin to redesign these systems up in a way that the government now has to react and respond to new systems? Yes. But what do you need? A critical mass of people who are not hypocrites. Okay. Why do I say that? And I'm going to end. There's no country I know in the world. I took my master in public administration at the Harvard University Kennedy School of Government. And I was chairperson for the International Affairs Committee. That is the most diverse university and graduate school of Harvard. I've never seen a country that organizes conferences and workshops and seminars like Nigeria. We don't solve problems in this country. We just talk. We sit down, talk, write great reports, and package them. What am I saying? As SERAP launches this report, I think that SERAP has done something remarkable with putting these conversations together. But I want to add a few things to the report if they are not there. Number one, in eliminating corruption in this COVID-19 intervention, you need a decentralization of powers within the systems. One person cannot be the one choosing who buys what, signing the checks, determine who does what. You can't fix corruption like that. Okay. Financial probity and accountability, where you can hold people accountable for certain decisions, extremely important. And then I will close by saying that if you need to really fix corruption, citizens need to pay more attention. You can't spend your time watching. The reason why Americans are so engaged with the politics and politicians bother about debating is because citizens are very active. Government is not about the people in the government. The power in the people is greater than the people in the power. So when if SERAP does this report and puts it in local languages and puts it on radio, where the ordinary Nigerian can say, so this is my fundamental human rights. So this is what, so MacArthur Foundation has more money to give SERAP to do that sort of work.
Okay. Well,
and I think that those are the things, that's the beginning where we need to really move and say we're really making progress, because we've got a ton of reports that we've not implemented in this country.
Well, something that I'm sure thank you. Something that I'm sure Mr. Candidate Johnson will tell you is that it's not that we solve problems.
In Nigeria?
Yes, we solve problems on paper. He started by saying that, earlier before you came. Thank you very much, Mr. Akeredolu Ogushiji. Mr. Candidate Johnson, I want to take you up on this. You started, was it you? I think it was you are the first person to mention the youths here today. Now, this panel discussion is on government transparency framework in response to COVID-19, challenges and future perspectives. To deliver that future, we need to solve today's problems. What are those challenges that we must solve? As in, must solve before the youth can make any meaningful impact in this nation?
Thanks. That's what I think they call a jam question. Well, sorry, just one sentence to say first of all before I answer that. I'm so often disconsolate about the state of Nigeria. When I sit on a panel like this, the brightness, the energy, the enthusiasm, the knowledge of the panelists, it just makes me proud to be a Nigerian and makes me feel that there's hope for Nigeria. I mean, what Mrs. Akeredolu Ogushiji spoke about is government. What they have set up is a system of government. Simple as that. It's not about titles. It's not about offices. It's about government. What is the delivery to the ordinary person of the values of their society? Simple as that. Now, as to what to do, I had to listen. I found a speech I wrote in 2005 at the 2005 LEAP Youth Awards, and I was exhorting the youth about servant leadership. And I found it, and reading it yesterday made me feel a bit sad, because it seems that the youth are not permitted to the youth invented politics in Nigeria. Youth took Nigeria from colonialism to independence. And all the people who are sitting down with their dead hand upon the government of Nigeria today started as youth. But they're afraid because their failure will become manifest if the youth should start to express themselves. So they need to put them down, locking up their accounts, beating them up, sending hooded thugs to attack them. But I think that what we need to do, it's a really difficult question. I think that we need to invest massively in education. I think we need to invest massively in the simplification of our government. The simplification of our government is what you have done in this report, because it seems to me that if people can't understand what needs to be done, they can't say you owe it to me. I saw a poster on some picture somebody posted to Instagram during the disturbances recently, and there was a banner somewhere in Lagos. It said, "Your senator, they collect 29 million per month.
Sure you don't chop.
Oh, sure you don't chop today." It's so simple and so powerful. And in that simple, digestible statement, you convey the responsibility, the wrongfulness, and the consequences to you of the failure of government. So when you ask what is the rule of law, you put it in one paragraph. I always say, when we're talking about constitution, they like to use sections, they like to multiply words. The multiplication of words without the achievement of communication is exhausting and pointless. So you need to explain to people, so the youth, who are you? You are the majority. You have these rights. They don't want to hear your voice, but your voice can be expressed through your vote. They don't want you to participate in the parties, but you can start your own. They don't want you to communicate in newspapers, but you can communicate on international platforms. You can organize, they said yesterday that Sheon Kuti is banned from holding a meeting for Movement for Nigeria. He should have had a luncheon party. He should no need to announce a meeting for political mobilization. Say, I'm inviting 25 of my good friends to attend an Owambe. That's all. So you have to outsmart people who are not smarter than you. The problem with confronting an enemy that is large and immobile is that you stand with them toe to toe. You have to go around them. If your enemy is large and powerful, you go around them, you show your mobility and your ability. So the activation of the youth of Nigeria is an extremely important political event in this country because it's historic. And the fact that you now say, right, how does youth organize? There are numerous abilities. Education is important. And another thing that you have to do is giving education to that section of the youth that you say is dispossessed and underprivileged. Because they don't understand. But the elite youth are rapping in pidgin English also. Why? It's communication. And I think that it's difficult to say one thing, but I would just laud the activation of the youth and say that education is the fundamental to upturning the injustice and upturning the offense and the whole crisis of competence and government which you see across Nigeria.
Thank you very much. Mr. Suraj, I'm going to ask you this question and then we'll go into the Q&A as well as interactive session. One of the things that has been underscored in all the conversation we've had here so far is that those ministries, departments, and agencies, you said you answered that question when I asked whether it was necessary for them to come up with any safeguards or guidelines or frameworks for COVID-19 spending. You said it wasn't necessary if they were doing their jobs. Now, that is the position. And we're here because that has not been done, despite the guides come up with by SERAP. And Mrs. Akele Johnson, Ogunsuji, beg your pardon, mentioned consequences. What should be the consequences for officers? I don't want to say consequences for ministries, departments, and agencies. Those are faceless. What should be the consequence for officers in the ministries, departments, and agencies empowered and assigned to do certain specific jobs to ensuring that safeguards created by their agencies to implement concerning corruption, to safeguard us against corruption in COVID-19 spending is tackled? What should be the consequence? It's not that the civil service doesn't have consequences, but maybe those consequences are not loud enough. What should be those consequences? Because that individual is representing that agency that has dropped the ball.
Thank you very much. And I think this is also where I really think that we should narrow down to. I mean, that otherwise, if we're not careful, we would lose the essence of that publication. And then, which is always the bane of holding public office holder accountable in Nigeria. So they know that Nigerians can talk. They know that we're passionate. They know we're very loud. So they create a crisis today. While you're still discussing that one, another one comes up. So you completely lose focus or forget about that one and chase the new one. So how do we take accountable, hold accountable? And for me, this is where we need to take this to the next level. So SERAP has assisted us in dealing with some of those very critical issues. And for us is to then now identify what are the programs and responses that were designed by government to respond to COVID-19. So there was a fund that was meant to go to private sector. There was a fund that was supposed to go to the health sector. There was a fund that was to go to the youth empowerment initiatives. There was a fund that was meant to go to conditional cash transfer and other palliative measures. And we did a monitoring of the distribution of the palliative, a report that would come out very soon, later in the month. And we discovered that about 30% of the designed, identified, or planned beneficiaries actually derive benefit from the palliative measures of the government at the federal and at the state level. We did a survey to measure the trust, and that was why I flew with you immediately. You were talking about the trust bank of the government. The currency of government is actually about trust. But there's a huge deficit. The survey showed that only 17% of Nigeria surveyed proved that Nigeria, the government, attempted or succeeded in actually genuinely responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. So which clearly told anybody that the COVID-19 pandemic actually met an existing pandemic in Nigeria. So it was a double tragedy for the country, the ordinary people. So the ordinary people that could not go to feed before that time were barely even existing during the COVID-19. And then going forward, we did an analysis. So the first thing expected of any country, a responsible and serious government, is to take an advantage of the COVID-19 to deal with the health challenges and health situation. And running that analysis for the government that projected a 500 billion naira intervention to respond to COVID, and 25 billion naira was also admitted by the Office of the Accountant General and the Central Bank as the amount already realized. This is also not looking at some of the international intervention and support, even to states. From that, we can have a minimum of 109 health centers at the 109 senatorial districts across the country, where you would have international standard of dealing with primary healthcare centers, primary healthcare issues. Malaria kills more than COVID-19, we all know. Yellow fever is already coming back and also attacking the young people. The responses you saw with Ebola and COVID-19 was not because the government was actually responsive. It was because people in government were also threatened, because it became the virus that would also attack the elite, and not just the one that you've seen with Lassa fever, malaria fever, and the kind of responses you see. So in holding government and people in office accountable, just like one of our consultants said, you can't manage what you can't measure. So the first thing for us is to measure the level of responsibility of each of the government officials and agencies. What has gone to them? What has CBN gotten? How has it used it? They know. I think we actually achieved one thing during the COVID-19 and the management. The level of public information provided from sources of funds. The usual experience has been, oh, we got 20 billion, and you won't hear where that came from. But we now didn't hear where it went to. Lagos State even took a step further by advertising the list of donors and the amounts donated. But we are yet to see the list of beneficiaries on contract. And that manifested itself in how you found the palliative materials in where the young people eventually revealed to us. Not the government revealed it, not the media, but intelligence within the young people. And that tells you, and I think the elite will learn from that where you think that is your safe haven, even the ordinary laborer that you use in moving those assets to those so safe haven, opportunity to expand. That was what happened with the palliative measure. Thank you very much, Mr.
Especially because it's these same people that moved them there in the first place. And you can know why. Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. But then, as we have said, we are going to take some of your own comments as well, joining us online, and we'll be taking some from those of us in the hall as well. I've seen the a comment from Mr. Mohammed Kolo of the Office of the Accountant General. He says he would like to bring our attention to government's modest efforts, some of which SERAP is a member. We'll find out that shortly. But then Chinedum Odaye from the NFIU sends this in. The COVID-19 pandemic, being a global public health emergency, came with identified crimes such as cyber crimes, frauds, scam schemes, counterfeiting of goods, and so on. But one of the most preeminent crimes that came with it was corruption, especially in the management of public and privately sourced resources. During public health emergencies like COVID, was or is, domestic and international pooling of resources is a constant feature. Some of those pooling include government stimulus and palliatives, corporate and private donations like the Victim Support Fund, which Madam here is talking about, and such things as COVID, multilateral donations. And let's not lose sight of the fact that there will be a high possibility of borrowing by government to stabilize the economy. However, as the looting that followed the NSAS protest showed, resources were hoarded, possibly corruptly or for corrupt purposes. Question that I would like to ask the NFIU is, so being an agency of government of sorts, what have we done about it? Let me see if we can engage Mr. Mohammed Kolo of the Office of the Accountant General. It says he would like to say a thing or two. If he is still with us this morning, Mr. Mohammed Kolo. If you are there, go ahead and talk to us.
My name is Mohammed Kolo, Office of the Accountant General of the Federation. I'm the officer responsible for reform management, government integrated financial management information system. Also, by congratulating you and appreciating you for the commitment and zeal to promote good governance in Nigeria. And I feel it is important I share one or two things that will strengthen the activity of SERAP. Already we are partnering with SERAP in the Open Treasury Portal, but by and large, government came with 3-point agenda, one of which is corruption. And also, we all know, accountability is not total financier for corruption, but while there is no accountability and transparency, corruption thrives freely. And that's what made transparency, accountability central in going forward. It is to that extent Nigeria signed as part of Open Government Partnership, and you all know what Open Government Partnership is all about. It goes beyond accountability and transparency, but also citizen participation in day-to-day activity of government is key. And the federal government is promoting this initiative not only by just pronouncement, but also to carry states along. The federal government alone cannot transform the country. The government also contracted a loan whereby states that are accountable and transparent and where they can publish their report in their state portals, as well as in the Open Treasury Portal, they're entitled for certain financial benefit to deepen accountability, transparency, and probity. These are things that, in my mind, and as you are also starting to promote, will go a long way in instilling accountability and transparency. As you also rightly mentioned, you said you cannot manage what you can't measure. And our budget system is the measurement put in place. The budget is anchored on a long-term development plan, translated into medium-term framework. And from the medium-term framework, annual budgets are being drawn. So this is to tell us how our measurement is also very crystal clear. And the budget process is also open, including what went to National Assembly. You can find it in Budget Office of the Federation portal. And what is approved, you also see it. And this gives you total picture of actually what the government is into. Therefore, just supporting that to also the Accountant General publication of threshold of activities, monthly, quarterly, annually, and the threshold of item to be published are already known. You can see that is rhyming, is coming together, such that there is clarity in budget information, clarity in spending, and the citizen have a say in the budget process. And you are aware also Cross River State is one of the states that put that detailed requirement into practice. Their medium-term expenditure framework was discussed online real-time using the same facility Zoom across the globe. They took their citizens' input into the budget. So this is how government is structured. And ironically also, if you take a public servant off guard on case by case, especially on issue that does not relate to his ministry, except very few who are very lucky who cross-fertilize with other ministries, department, and most people will get them off guard because each ministry is a policy arm of the federal, of the government, either of a state or of a federal government. Therefore, we need to appreciate that fact. As much as we want reform, I think we should take it through the handle. The Constitution provides for citizens' right. You have a very good ground. The constitutional provision about citizen right is well spelled out. Whatever we are doing, let's take it in the context of our development agenda, in the context of what we do day by day, and in line with good standard practice, we should look at issues, critically evaluate them based on SWOT analysis, strengths, weakness, opportunities.
We can barely hear you.
Oh dear. Yes.
Your voice seems to be breaking now. Yeah,
okay.
But
Yes,
there's
sir.
a question that I'd very much love for you to answer.
Thank you.
The Office of the Accountant General came with a 12-point plan framework of ensuring that things are done properly as far as the COVID-19 spendings and all of that are concerned. That document is titled Framework for the Management of COVID-19 Funds in Nigeria under the Treasury Single Account. From where you stand, how effectively would you say that the ministries, departments, and agencies have lined up to what the Office of the Accountant General and by reference the federal government expected them to do?
Yeah, the document you are making reference to is the Treasury Circular issued by the Accountant General of the Federation to manage COVID-19 spending. And the Accountant General is empowered to come up with a guideline on public finance generally. So that guideline addresses the affairs of all the ministries, departments, and agencies, and all the ministries, departments, and agencies, those on our budget, are handled on the Government Integrated Financial Management Information Platform. Therefore, whatever they spend using the application, the Accountant General's office has the capacity to run a report and populate the open Treasury portal accordingly. I hope that answers your question, sir.
Well, as is obvious, we will find out if we are all satisfied in the whole. Most certainly, you will still be able to join us. But thank you very much, Mr. Kolo, for being a part of this conversation so far. Well, if there is anyone else online who would like to be a part of this conversation, all you have to do is use the raise hand feature, just as we have said, and you will be recognized and you'll be allowed to say a thing or two. And if you'd rather just drop a message, we have read the message of someone who sent in word earlier, and that is Chinedu Odenye from the NFIU. I don't know if Mr. Kandi Johnson would like to respond to what Mr. Kolo just said, but just before you do that, is there anyone in the hall who would like to say a thing or two? All right, please. Can we give her the microphone, please? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to appreciate Sarah for this project. And I've listened to all the panelists and I'm quite amazed with the information I've gotten so far. But one key thing I want to look off was to really put our mind towards. Like when I heard the officer from the Accountant General's office, every year, yes, we do have budgets. But I ask, are those budgets really workable? Because there's something called citizens tracking your budgets. Every day we see them read out, and people go and defend it. But the feedback mechanism to see whether those monies allocated for those particular projects, especially now in the light of the COVID-19, when we found out that the healthcare sector was, in fact, every year we have a health budget. We have primary healthcare centers that never receive any of the items that were budgeted for them. We don't have medical personnel in those healthcare centers. It begins to show that means the Ministry of Health that actually proposed that project. And I believe that in their plan, they also have short-term, medium-term, and long-term planning of how the healthcare center is supposed to run, especially in terms of the right to health of citizens of Nigeria. But we don't see those budgets being translated downwards. That means if I go to a primary healthcare center, the certain provisions are supposed to be allowed to access. When I go there, to test for malaria is the problem. It's a challenge on its own. Because they'll tell you either they don't have the reagents for the testing or their labs are not working. And I begin to wonder, do we as government agencies, MDAs, have a feedback mechanism, or is there someone with, to things, inspectorate divisions that actually, follow up on all those things that are budgeted from, either from the Accountant General's office or from a social unit? I thought that was why Servicom was introduced in the first place.
I was going to answer you that there is Debt Service Charter, there is Servicom, right? And
is it functional?
If I can also comfort you with this information on paper.
Okay.
And that is the fact that there is the Auditor General's office who is supposed to ensure accountability, and probity within the system. And then we have had successive Auditor General's report since 2013, thereabout, every year. And that goes naturally to the National Assembly. Personally, in the course of doing my job, I've had to ask the members of the National Assembly, which one I did this team do? But I'm yet to get satisfactory answer. Maybe as they answered, other people, are satisfied. I am not yet, but maybe when I do, I'll let you know one of these days.
Okay, why I'm thinking these actions are coming from the National Human Rights Commission, where the rights of citizens to health and every other thing is paramount. I think maybe we should kickstart by starting the bottom-up approach.
Okay.
How do citizens want their healthcare to function? And if you go to a healthcare center, you must be able to have a feedback form or something that you can feel to tell us your experience of assessing that health. That healthcare, because I know from the few times I've been to the public sector health institutions, you spend massive hours receiving nothing.
That's what I was asking the other time.
So that means for we as government agencies, our accountability to ensure that people's rights are protected and guaranteed, we have failed. And that means we must begin to do something differently from now on. The youths are telling us, if we failed ourselves, we can't fail them because they are the future.
I don't even think they will allow you to fail them. But Dr. Emmanuel Shetonde of NFIU would like to say a thing or two.
Good afternoon. I also want to join others to congratulate Sarah for this wonderful initiative. Can you hear me?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, so I want to congratulate Sarah for this wonderful initiative, but I just need to say something again to follow what the panelists have discussed extensively, that we need to follow the talk, we need to do the talk, not just having conversation. But I just want to also say that this challenge is not also limited to Nigeria. For example, we've seen incidents of COVID-19 corruption in South Africa, in Kenya, also in Egypt. But what we need to do in Nigeria is, for the angle of the NFIU, is to see how can we follow the money. I have a bit of a few statistics with me that I'd like to share. The total value of suspicious transaction report tied to COVID-19, incidents of COVID-19 abuses in Nigeria as reported by financial institutions to date stand at 2.7 billion naira. And that is just on the face of reporting. A single analysis of one of them showed that about 5.8 billion has moved from the account of the beneficiaries of this fund to Bureau de change. So what we are saying now is, how can we get this 5.8 billion that has moved to the Bureau de change? And that is where the role of competent authorities is crucial. So at the NFIU, all hands on deck, we are trying to share intelligence of how these funds are moving with competent authorities, law enforcement in particular, in order to go and see how this fund can be recovered for the purpose of which it's being meant for. But we just need to work together in terms of looking on how can we implement this 10-point
Oh dear, I don't know. We're struggling to really comprehend what you're saying there, Mr. Candy Johnson. Beg your pardon, Mr. Why is your name so delicious? All right. Well, let's see if we can get someone else in the conversation to join who would like to say a thing or two. I can see Mr. Odenyi from NFIU as well. You already sent in a message, unless it's different from what you said earlier. Can we take you, Mr. Odenyi, very quickly? Depending on how good.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Go ahead.
Yeah, if you can hear me, I just, for other to what Dr. Shu today, my colleague said, that there are some risk factors we've identified. By the way, there is a committee on COVID-19 spendings.
We can't see you unless you are wearing a masquerade.
I'm not. But you can hear me?
Oh, all right, go ahead, go ahead.
All right, so I was talking about the risk factors. And by the way, there is a COVID-19. Long before the spending started, the NFIU was proactive to set up a COVID-19 subcommittee under the public account analysis and reporting department. So some of the risk factors that we know that we will contend with include emergency procurement exposure. You know that in an emergency, as COVID is, because of the urgent needs, because of the need to spend urgently, that procurement orders may not get to the sufficient levels of transparency that we would desire. We noted that. We also noted that there would be a raft and almost uncoordinated unveiling of measures and monetary support. The government has a number of measures, then the private and corporate and multilateral institutions put in place some things to try, like the COVID, the victim support. So as Dr. Shutade said, we have an obligation to report what we see to
well, Mr. Odenyi, I guess network is telling you should have been here. Because we're really unable to hear, but we picked a thing or two for what you said.
All right.
Media Cora of Amnesty International points. Three straight. Number one, COVID-19 has the Nigerian security agencies. The risk affect economic rights of Nigerians. And number three, the Freedom of Information Act should be utilized to ability from various agencies and government. Well, I say amen. So don't why Professor George was talking the other time. He mentioned SERAP has 40 requests, 40 information requests from MDAs. Well, in closing, will you tell us how many? Someone else in this would like to say? Yes, please come. The microphone for him, please.
Thank you. Professor Akinshare George said why he
ma questo documento che io vi sto per leggere dovete
particularly at the state level.
I was sharing with Mr. Kolawole before we started today the experience of a good friend of my dad who was the chief judge of a state. When the judiciary ruled in favor of the Okada riders against the state military administrator then, what the military administrator did was to take all the official cars of the judges and their entitlements were seized for that period. So you could see judges going to court on Okada, who they took the right stand for. So going forward, I believe that this advocacy is very important.
What state is that?
Akwa Ibom. That was in the early 90s. So going forward, the judiciary must be given that desired allocation. I know that the chairman of the House Committee on Judicial Matters raised that importance in terms of the transfer to the judicial system, over 100 billion naira, that they need more equipment. And to add to that, we are in the age of digital technology. Records and electronic processes for courts is very important, as we see in other democracies. A situation where Igboshere Court, a very notable court, was vandalized and destroyed. The question of what happens to records like wills and trusts comes to the fore. How would people get their records and archives in that regard? So I want to submit that it's very important that we support the cause for an independent and autonomous judiciary equipped and funded to support and stand for justice, because it's the judiciary that can call the executive and legislature to account in the midst of any intimidation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. But don't also forget that if you look at the 2017 Auditor General's reports, one of the highest violators of the financial rules set by the federal government itself, which is in terms of, I think it's remittances to government coffers, one of the largest violators was the Federal Ministry of Justice. So you want to find out how that can be done. But then there's someone right there in front of you.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Dada from African News 24. Although I came late, but something caught my attention. I looked at this 10-point program of action, this booklet, and 6 particularly caught my attention. I want to read a part of it. So to this end, President Muhammadu Buhari should exert leadership by directing the Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission in conjunction with other MDAs to take immediate and concrete measures to cut the salaries and allowances of all political officers and so on. This is what we have been talking about for years, that the cost of running, the cost of government is so high. We have a situation where you have too many political officers, special advisors, having special assistants, or maybe deputy special assistant and assistant deputy special assistants, all of that. And I'm thinking, is it possible? Don't you think it's now time to begin to seek legislative intervention? Although one might also say that the lawmakers themselves are the most guilty of this because of all their bogus, illicit, debauched allowances that aside from their salaries and other entitlements that they think they have. So I think it's time we begin to seek for legislative interventions, just like what the Lagos State governor did recently. He realized that given the realities of today, the bogus pensions that we give to governors and the needless ones, give to governors and deputy governors is no longer, it's not realistic. And I think another state followed suit. So I think, I don't know whether it's something that SERAP should also do, beyond persuading the president now, because I don't know, given his antecedents, and I'm not sure the president, well, if you want to do that, I'm not sure, maybe he can, but I think we should go to the legislature.
Okay, there's a song, I forgot the name of the artist now. if you ask me. Now I will ask. All right, please, could you pose the camera back to Mr. Mumini? He has a thing or two to say. Maybe it's on that same matter.
Thank you very much. You see, when Sanwo-Olu said he was cancelling or abolishing pensions to governors and deputy governors, and that he will send a bill to the House for that purpose. You see, it is not a question of sending freedom of information request alone. We have obtained over 40 judgments. Judgments of a court of competent jurisdiction saying one thing or the other. As a matter of fact, SERAP took the case of pensions before a federal high court. I think it was in 2018 that judgment was delivered. And I think it is Justice Okun of the Federal High Court that said it is not realistic that that money must be paid. And the judge said we should report to her on constant basis as to what is happening about the implementation of that judgment. So apart from the fact that, and that has been our argument, that such type of money is not realistic. Not only economically unrealistic, it is morally at cost. How would you be paying naira to people that had the opportunity of being in government, that had amassed and used the privileged position they have to more or less fritter away the resources of the state, and you now start paying them as if they perform any serious service to Nigerians? The idea of pension in the first place is for people that have served all their lives, civil servants, all their lives, and that they are retiring at the age of 60. And when it is presumed that they won't have any strength to work for themselves again, that is the idea of pension. That is the beginning of pension as we know it. But when we now start hearing of pension for political office holders, we start having problems. So, apart from the fact that it is not economically unrealistic, it is economically unrealistic, it is morally unjust to think about pension for political office holders. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Wimini. Thank you. Well, so much has been said here today, and we could go on, but we will definitely always come back to this same spot. Some of our takeaways today are pretty simple. Number one, we need to decentralize power within the system. I think that was a proposition by Mrs. Akerele Ogunshiji. Financial autonomy for the judiciary and the legislature, that point has also been raised. The question that I just want to ask is, are the judiciary and the legislature willing to have financial autonomy? I say that because I think it was in 2010, I took a tour with a civil society organization across the 6 states of the Southwest, advocating that they should support financial autonomy for state legislature. Verily, verily, I say unto thee, some of them were against it. So that has been raised, but then whether or not this is something they would themselves welcome, that's another thing altogether. Simplification of government policies for proper education and translation of laws containing people's rights into local languages. The very first radio program that I produced as a broadcaster in 1991 was called Legal Stand. It was for 10 minutes. Up until now, people have not been able to take a legal stand. Education of the oppressed and underprivileged section of the Nigerian youths has also been cited as a point here. Citizens must get involved in the system to change it. Clearly, a very strong tool is in the hands of the most populous demography in Nigeria today, and that is the social media and, of course, all digital media platforms. And lastly, to ensure transparency and accountability, government must put in place effective measures for budget tracking and feedback mechanisms. These are the points that we have raised today, and it's our way forward and the next steps that should be taken. Clearly, we have given government's own assignment here. Civil society organizations have their jobs cut out for them, but the most critical mass is the masses, and we must also perform our role significantly if Nigeria is to get to the promised land. I have to thank you very much, our distinguished panelists, starting with the lady, Mrs. Toyosi Akerele-Ogunshiji. Thank you so much for your time. She's chair of Victim Support Fund. Mr. Larry Suraj, chairman of HEDA. Thank you very much. And the gentlemen of the, I don't even know whether to call them the jury or the bar or the bench. But I have to thank you very much, Professor Yemi Akisheye George, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, and Mr. Yemi Candid Johnson, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. Thank you all for being here today. Can I have a round of applause for them as they return to their places? Okay. Please break the monotony. Please pause. We can't see your face. So the pictures. 5, 4. Okay. Hold it. Pause. Make it more meaningful. Mr. Adesokunbo Mimini is joining. Please, that's your masquerade. Remove your masquerade. All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well done on the good work.
I'd like to call, thank you, Mrs. Joke Fekumo, Senior Legal Advisor at SERAP, to come take the vote of thanks here today.
Thank you. Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Socioeconomic Rights and Accountability Project, I express my unreserved appreciation to the MacArthur Foundation, particularly Dr. Kole Shetima. We are saying thank you for the sponsorship of today's event. Our gratitude knows no bounds. We express further gratitude to Professor Yemi Akisheye George, the prolific presenter for today. Thank you as well for doubling as one of the panelists. Thank you for exposing the issues in a prolific manner. Also, we are conveying immense thanks to Mr. Yemi Candid Johnson, Leonard Silk, Mr. Lanrewaju Suraj, Executive Director of HEDA Resources, Mrs. Toyosi Akerele-Ogunshiji, the Chairperson of the Victim Support Trust, Victim Support Fund, COVID-19 Task Force, representatives of various NGOs, CSOs, and MTS, but virtually and in this hall, Ms. Saitoro Duru of the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Mr. Mohammed Kolo, Office of the Accountant General of the Federation, Mr. Godwin Odusoya of Amnesty International, Dr. Emmanuel Shotonde of NFIU, Patricia Nwosu, Mrs. Mojisola Oguntero, and Mr. Bede Akora. Finally, a jillion thanks to SERAP Executive Director, SERAP Deputy Director, SERAP Legal Team, SERAP Support Staff, and SERAP Program Officers. We say thanks a ton to everyone for coming to today's event for the sole purpose of nation building. See you at our next event.
Has already proposed SERAP FM. You have one of your presenters. Well, I understand that lunch is served at the restaurant, and if there is any protocol, I'm sure we'll get the protocol right there at the announcement stand. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.